Oh, there. Hey, welcome to YouTube and the Journey podcast. That's all wrong.
Talking to the mic.
Sorry.
Damn it.
But it hides my face.
I'm tired of telling you.
Hi.
I have to tell you 18 times. Talking to the goddamn mic.
Sorry, Dad. Hi.
That's better.
This is the Journey NYC podcast YouTube channel. Is that better?
Yes. So just like don't nod your head like that.
All right, it was my idea, but Anthony's been the one that's doing all the most of the work for it, to be honest. But the idea was really just about trying to find a way to highlight people's stories that may not otherwise get told. Like, I listen to podcasts. We all listen to podcasts. Generally, it's one celebrity talking to another celebrity about celebrity stuff. And yes, that's interesting. But at some point, I think that you can lose sight of the fact that we all have stories to tell. So I mentioned it to Anthony. I said, it'd be cool is if we had a podcast where basically we could just talk to people about their lives and what they've experienced, and that's all I said.
It's true.
Yeah, and that was literally it. And then a couple days later, you had called me up and asked me to get together to work on it, and how are we going to make this thing work? And then it was pretty much Anthony running the show from then on.
Jesse didn't know what was going to happen, but he was around for the ride, and it happened.
Yeah, it was a lesson learned kind of thing.
Don't mention anything in my presence.
Exactly. Anthony's going to run with it.
Yeah.
So Anthony just was like, so you told him about the idea, then Anthony hit you with the invoice for the equipment? Like,
No.
Yeah. Anthony paid for the equipment, actually, very generously.
I did ask him what we needed. I was like, how's this? What about this?
Yeah, all this stuff.
I learned what a microphone.
The setup came out pretty good, actually.
Yeah. And then Jacques was like, well, we need something better visually. Well, you need this. And so then that happened.
Yes, that's Paul Castle's contribution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty, like, if you tell me something, I'll be like, that sounds great. Let's do it.
But I mean, I think like the format of the podcast, I loosely drew it from stories that I've heard around 12-step program qualifications, essentially. And the general format of that would be you talk about your life in a kind of a very structured way, or at least your experience around recovery. So you start with what life was like while you were trying to deal with whatever you struggled with, and then what happened to change that, and what life is like now. So we kind of try to structure that same format for our guests to just make it a little bit more succinct in terms of what they're sharing with us. And it's what I mean, my big takeaway again is just that every story we hear runs the gamut from drug addiction or alcoholism to battling major life-threatening diseases like cancer, diabetes, then
MS.
losing MS, losing parents, dealing with struggling with changing your sex, or understanding of like your own sexuality, or coming out to your parents or society, and or even just becoming like an Olympic athlete, and the kind of vigor and work it takes just to get to that level. And all of these stories are so different if you were to look at them on paper, but at the same time, they all are very, very similar. And it's just the human experience of it that has surprised me, because when we talk about who we want to have on the show and what kind of guests we'd like to have on next, it always seems like, oh, well, this is going to be like a very unique or different kind of story. This is one that's going to really be a very different sounding story. And then they are, but at the same time, like the underlying, like, I don't know, it's like when we're personal training, like you've got 7 fundamental movements, right?
Mhm.
Like you've got your squat, your hip hinge,
Yeah.
overhead press, whatever. But you could do thousands of different exercises with those 7 fundamental
Mhm.
things. And it's similar in that, like, we hear many, many different stories, but at the base of them, we're talking about, you know, love, fear, you know,
Courage.
perseverance, courage, humility, and just humanness
Yeah.
throughout it all.
This is the most he's ever talked than on the 9 episodes of the entire
Yeah.
podcast.
This is why I thought it was a great idea. I mean, it's like,
I've filled my quota, so I don't have to talk anymore. I'm done.
like I've always known that Jesse has a really deep side, and I knew that generally when he voices something, that there's it's the iceberg. What he voices is just the tip that's on the top, and what's underneath that is like really quite amazing. And I think that's what I loved about the idea. I had toyed with the thought of a podcast, but didn't really have a idea of what the topics may or may not be. We had worked on a few projects before, and then I really liked the human component of it. I think so much of what we see, and we talk about this as well, is what's consumed is so polished up and so beautiful. And the truth is the majority of our society, you know, everyone's made a mistake. We've said stupid things at some point in our life. We've grown up and we've matured and we've changed. And, you know, sometimes it's through these huge events in life or diagnoses or whatever it is. And other times it's just through time. But I think that it's important for people to highlight and acknowledge these things about themselves.
Yeah, and one of the things, like when Emery spoke, he was like, you know, one of the most helpful things that he was able to, it was a healing thing for him, I think, was that he finally found people that were like him.
Yep.
And that they represented hope to him, because they were people that were doing good things and happy and living full lives. And he had grown up in an environment that was so not that. And so, like, my hope is that by having all of these guests on that are having all very different experiences in life, but also sharing a lot of commonalities, will help people to feel like they're seeing themselves in others.
Exactly.
How did we meet? At the studio. Yeah.
Yep. I was overhearing your conversation about
That's right.
having a puppy dog.
Milo.
And you were having a conversation with your girlfriend about she wanted one. You weren't sure about the commitment of what it was going to take. And it was...
Was that long ago, huh? That's a couple years ago now.
Yeah.
So you weren't married then?
He's
Still not
not
married.
married.
Still not married? Oh, okay.
But we do have the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a couple years ago, because Milo's 2. So
Best godson ever.
best godfather ever. Dogfather.
Dogfather.
Yeah.
Dogfather part 2.
I get presented with the butt. I scritch the butt.
He peed on him the other day.
Yep.
Yes.
None of this is endearing to me. None of this is like, man, I'm just gonna say.
Hey, I got peed on and I didn't kill him.
Jesus. What was I gonna? I had a whole other question.
Jesus.
Dog conversation happened. I'm just like. Just
Do
like
the Jesse C-SPAN speech.
Well, I think...
You have to take a sip of water first.
Exactly. I think my journey is really... My father passed away suddenly when I was 10. So it was a really traumatic childhood. I think I learned very quickly how to compartmentalize life. And I can distinctly remember as a child telling my neighbor being sent across the street to tell the neighbor that dad had died. And it not being a big deal, it was a way that you learned how to get attention, I think, which was interesting as a 10-year-old. I do find that when I look at kids who are 10 now, that I try to understand going, and I see who they are as 10-year-olds, and it's such a mind-blowing experience for me to think, I was that age when my dad died. I had been sexually molested from before that. Not necessarily by my father, so that's not a thing, but I grew up with that, a large portion of knowing all of that, and spent many, many years in therapy trying to, deal with that and what that sounded like in my head and what it felt like as an adult, and realizing that you generally do not let those things go. I think I survived an eating disorder for, many years, trying to get into a field of work that, the skinnier you were, the better it was. And, in that time, as you go through a lot of ups and downs emotionally, just because your body's trying to basically consuming itself, and, you're trying to figure out how to stay thin all the time. Yeah, but I mean, I think the one thing that I've always been, and, is we talk a lot of that people cope in different ways. I've always coped by being a busybody. So I've always been a doer, but like, as I worked 3 jobs and went to school and put myself, and did community theater and did a million things, and I was always working 7 days a week. So I think I've always had that busybody nature. And I think that's the way I cope. I just keep busy.
Have you balanced that out in some fashion, or is it just like,
How long have you known me?
That's not for me, it's for the audience. Like, I know.
I'm still working on it. It's still a journey. I'm still a
I know
busybody.
that's a rhetorical question. But I don't know if the audience knows that yet.
Oh, no, I'm just kidding. Yeah. I mean, look, it's always a balancing act. I think the world definitely likes to remind me that I'm human from time to time, and like kick my ass and lay me out flat. But other than that, I like working, and I like interacting with people. I like doing things like this. I like pushing Jesse to do a podcast. Hey, Jesse pushes me to row, which is not my favorite thing in the world, but
you all roll together? I didn't know that.
yeah.
I'd rather be rowing.
Yeah. And I like seeing him get out of, and
out of my comfort zone
and sharing his stories.
Yeah. I mean, my thing is, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. We're very different personality wise. Obviously, you'll pick that up immediately if you listen to any of these podcasts, but where we're common, where we're the same, is that I think we both shared a fair amount of pain as children, like so many people do. And, how you cope with that and how you pick up skills along the way that will help you to get through life, that may or may not still serve you. I went a different route as a kid. My parents divorced when I was 9, and I went back and forth from different houses, with either my mother or my father, and struggled through school. But I had a really close-knit group of friends, and so we kind of supported each other and fell into partying early on, and so drinking became a really big part of my life super early, super young. And it was just something that I did as a coping mechanism. Like, at first it was just looked like partying with my friends, but at some point it became more of an issue than just going out for a party every once in a while. And like Antoni talked about, just keeping super busy all the time. Like, my thing was just checking out, drinking, getting as drunk as I possibly could. Like, I never really related to somebody like at a restaurant, like having a half a glass of wine and being like, I'm full, and like putting the glass of wine down, and that's it. Like I would want the whole bottle and then another bottle, and that's just like my personality and the way that I've always been. I think you can always grasp at reasons why. Certainly didn't have a perfect childhood, but nobody does. So blame it on that. I don't know. I think that there's kind of more of an existential question of just like, how do you deal with the stresses of life? How do you deal with human existence? And like, some people choose substances, some people choose online shopping, work, sex, food, exercise. Like, I think everyone's prone to kind of like seeking extremes in some way to compensate for the stresses of life. And so, for me, abstinence from drinking, abstinence from drugs, complete, sobriety in that area was really the only solution that was going to work for me. Practicing control, it just wasn't going to happen. I don't do moderation very well.
Neither do I.
Sorry to interrupt, but do you think that's translate like your process into the drinking? Do you think that's translated over to you, like going maybe hard as far as like trying to live a healthy lifestyle with like your exercise and your training and things like that? Like,
yeah, for sure. I mean, for sure. Yeah, it's a good insight. I think when I first got sober, my replacement to just the sheer amount of time spent drinking was exercise. Partly because I think, endorphins get released and it's some form of high and it elevates your mood. But the other thing is just like, where I used to have so much energy put towards drinking was now like I was up in my own head all the time. And like I needed a way to get out of my own head. And I did just exercise became like the best substitute for that. But I mean, I see, like, I think it's possible to overdo that too easily and become obsessive. And I think I ran the risk, and I had to come to terms with this eventually, was that like, what am I really trying to achieve here? Like, there's an aspect of like perfectionism in everything that I do where I feel like if I can just get perfect in this way, then everything will be okay. Like if I can just achieve this level of you name what, then I'll be happy. And I think people, and I do this as well, like conflate happiness with like material achievement. Even if it is as intrinsic as like working on your body and becoming healthier, it is in a way superficial. It is in a way materialistic. Because it's searching for something outside of yourself to feel better. And that's kind of analogous to an addiction or alcoholism. It's like using a substance in a way to feel better. So you put one thing down, and like I like using it like its analogy to like a like whack-a-mole, like, wow, like I'm playing a shit ton of video games right now. Like I'm just going to stop playing video games, and then like a couple days later, you're like, Jesus, I'm eating like 4 bars of chocolate every 2 hours. So like now I'm going to stop eating chocolate, and then be like, I haven't gotten up from the computer. I've been working all day long. Like, it's just like this whack-a-mole where you're just knocking stuff down. But
an addictive personality.
yeah, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't know if anybody really knows truly like what that even really means. I mean, I know in like a 12-step program, the concept is all about spirituality. So it's about like whether or not you have a connection to a higher power. Call it God or whatever, spirit of the universe or whatever it is that you believe in. But it's, I think what, the lack of feeling of connection is a big reason why people seek outside stuff. People call it like the God-sized hole or the God-shaped hole. Like people describe like a darkness or a hole or something that they're trying to fill, a void. Like what is this feeling of like, I have like a void inside of me. I'm unrestful. I'm uneasy. I'm anxious. I need something, you know, so food, sugar, drugs, sex, again, anything, like just anything you can think of to just fill that void. And the reason why 12-step programs tend to really focus on spirituality is because it seems to work. And it also, it gets you out of your own head. It gives you some sense of humility because you realize that you're not God, you're not in control of it all. And it also gives you an opportunity to be of service, which is just super important. Because like, if you're up in your own head and you're feeling like, you know, you're feeling bad about yourself, or you're projecting into the future, or you're thinking about things that you did in the past, and you're not in the present, like the best way to get there is to just pick up the phone and talk to somebody else, see how their day's doing, you know. And that's why, like, you know, for our profession as trainers, it's such a wonderful gift, because I spend all day long hearing about other people, talking about other people. And so for me, that talking to other people, and so for me, that keeps me out of my own head, you know. So like, the more that I can do that, the less prone I am to, you know, picking something up to try to make myself feel better in some way. But so yeah, I mean, that was the beginning of this whole thing. Was just like, I hear a lot of stories, I hear a lot of hope from people, and you don't have to be an alcoholic, you don't have to be an addict in order to have a really compelling, beautiful story, and we all have them. And so I figured, why not just try to highlight those as much as we can.
Well, I think also it's, for me, I know a lot of it is, it's finding that connection between every story that we've heard.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
and
They're all connected.
and that they are connected somehow. You know, so I mean, yeah, I mean, and Jesse says it best, is we all find different ways of, you know, of numbing, so to speak, or distracting ourselves. You know, is, I can remember to the, you know, when I was told, you're just lazy. You're the lazy, you know, you're the laziest. And to this day, I still hear it, you know, is I hear that I'm selfish, that I hear, you know, and it's like, what do you do to cope with those things? So you feel, you know, for me is I feel guilty when I'm not doing something. So it's, you know, I think, again, is I think that it's there, and there is a vulnerability that, you know, is all of our guests share, and I feel when we're, you know, when we're sharing, you know, even our own stories, you know, but I value what we do, and also the opportunity that Jesse's presented, you know, by just having that I think the thought, you know, to even put that out there, because while I am a doer and I do like to do a lot of things, I don't know if I'd have had the courage to even think about putting something like this out there, because I don't naturally share my story very easily, because it's painful, you know, and it's not the easiest thing to talk about.
I think, to me, the journey just means that it's a shared collection of stories to kind of, I to put it as succinctly as possible, it's like taking a bunch of different stories and putting them together and getting like a big picture out of it, like a collage. You know what I mean? Like, every story we've heard so far has its piece in this collage of, I guess it's like a picture of humanity, and each one colors it, and some are really dark and some are really bright, and like they all go together perfectly, and there's no right or wrong answer, and we're all just in this trying to figure it out. And so it's really, for me, it's just like a kind of a celebration of humanity, and just like an opportunity for people to give hope to others, an opportunity for people to share their own strength. And you know, it's just that's about it.
What would you say the journey is?
For me, it's a visual. Like the journey is the friendship that Jesse and I share. It's a path that happened by chance, that didn't necessarily intersect. It started with an idea, you know, and something, and then it becomes something else. I think it's a constant pattern of growth, you know, and awareness. And I think that also is one of the best things like about our friendship is that I never feel like I'm being judged. Like I can have the shittiest day possible and I'm like, let's go work out. Or I'll invite myself to his workout because I'm like, I just need to get out of my own head. And I never feel like it's you're judged through it. And I think in the journey of life, it's like that's what we all look for, is not to be judged for whatever choices we made. And let's face it, is I make bad choices, you know, and I make poor choices. But in general is I'm allowed to be. And, you know, and that's sort of what we try to give our guests as well, is the ability to just be and share their, you know, their stories, their fears, and, you know, their triumphs.
And action.
So if you liked what you heard today and you want to continue to follow us, you can like, subscribe, and share.
Woohoo!
Woohoo. Woo-hoo. Is that good?
I love it.